Welcome to Short Movie Channel. The film starts with a retired soldier named John, who is sitting alone at home. John is a desperate and mentally disturbed person suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. This is because when he was in the army, he participated in many battles and witnessed all of his friends dying in front of him, and he couldn't do anything to help them. Additionally, he killed many innocent people, which, of course, affected his mental state and turned him into a hopeless person who wishes to die at any moment. He even sits at home, takes out his weapon, and decides to play a deadly game. The game involves him placing a bullet in the chamber of his revolver, spinning the chamber randomly, and then pointing the gun at his head and pulling the trigger. Of course, if his luck is bad, he will die immediately. Due to his constant despair and desire to end his life, he decides to play this game with 2 bullets instead of 1, hoping to increase his chances of dying. He points the gun at his head and pulls the trigger, but he is lucky and survives by a miracle. This frustrates John even more. So, he decides to go buy some alcohol to get drunk, and he heads to the supermarket. Suddenly, while in the store, 2 armed robbers enter and begin robbing the place. They threaten everyone in the store, forcing them to lie on the floor and not move. But John doesn't pay them any attention. He continues looking for the items he wants in the store as if they aren't even there. One of the robbers approaches him, points the gun at him, and orders him to get on the floor. But John doesn't care about his commands and continues to provoke the robber, hoping the robber will shoot and kill him, as he wishes. However, the robber hesitates, and does nothing except continue threatening him. John then loses his temper, grabs the robber's gun, and shoots him. The other robber attacks John, but John manages to shoot him as well. It becomes clear that John has high combat skills, likely due to his background as a soldier in the army. John takes all the money the robbers stole and returns it to the store owner, grabs his drink, and leaves. He heads back home and continues drinking heavily until he passes out. The next day, John wakes up to the sound of his sister, Sandy, who is upset because she just returned from a trip, and John was supposed to meet her at the airport. However, due to his drinking, he missed her arrival. Sandy had to come home alone with her luggage. John apologizes to her and explains that what happened was beyond his control. Sandy forgives him immediately and hugs him since they haven't seen each other in a long time. Then they decide to go out for dinner together, and they talk about their lives. Sandy tells her brother that she will only stay with him for that day, as she is traveling to Brazil the next day. She works in charity, helping poor communities there, offering them any assistance she can. John is proud of her, and he decides to stay with her for as long as she's there, since he doesn't know when he'll see her again. It's clear that they have a close relationship, and John considers his sister to be the best part of his life. The next day, Sandy gets ready to leave for the airport. She notices her brother is exhausted, so she decides not to disturb him. She takes her bags and heads to the airport to fly to Brazil. Everything seems fine until John receives a call from an old friend named Manny, who works at the U.S. Embassy in Brazil. Before Manny traveled to Brazil to start his work there, he was very close friends with John. The shocking news is that Manny calls John to inform him that his sister Sandy was the victim of an attempted murder in Brazil. He tells him that she is still alive, but she has slipped into a coma and her condition is extremely critical. John is devastated by this news and immediately starts preparing to catch the next flight to Brazil. The next day, John arrives there and meets his friend Manny, whom he hasn't seen in a long time. At that moment, they take their friend and head to the hospital where Sandy is being treated. Sandy is injured almost all over her body, and her condition is very critical. As soon as John sees her like this, he gets very upset and can't understand how this happened. What confuses him even more is that his sister was there to do a good deed. John tries to talk to Manny to figure out what happened, and Manny tells him that they haven't gotten anywhere yet, but the investigation is ongoing. At that moment, the detective in charge of Sandy's case, named Tyab, arrives and meets with John. Tyab understands that he and his partner Carlo are working on the case, and they are doing everything they can to figure out what happened to his sister. But the problem is, The case is so vague that there are no witnesses to the assault on Sandy. John decides to intervene and help. He asks them to take him to the place where they found his sister, hoping to find any clue. Tayab tells him that these Brazilian areas are very dangerous, and that everyone there is involved in drugs and criminal activities. But of course, John doesn't care about this and insists on going there. They are forced to take him to the location, where John meets a policewoman named Raina, who is the first to have seen Sandy injured and took her to the hospital. Raina recognizes John and takes him to the place where she found his sister. John is surprised because there are many people around that area, but there are still no witnesses to what happened. Raina tells him that all the people living there are criminals, so no one will help the police in any way. John realizes that this case is not easy, so he decides to go back to the hospital to check on his sister, and then return to help them with the investigation. When he gets back to the hospital, he finds an Asian nurse who is putting a needle in the drip that Sandy is hooked up to. John is surprised and asks the nurse if everything is okay. She reassures him and tells him that it's just the scheduled medication. The nurse finishes her task and leaves the room, and John sits down to rest a bit because he's tired from the travel. But suddenly, while sitting, he notices his sister having strange spasms. He quickly calls for the Asian nurse who had been there, but he finds that she has completely disappeared with no trace. Another nurse arrives to help Sandy, but her condition is critical and she's on the verge of death. However, the nurse manages to save her miraculously. After Sandy's condition stabilizes, John goes to ask about the nurse who had put the needle in the but he learns that there is no nurse with that description working in the hospital. John realizes that the woman was trying to kill his sister, and that this is much bigger than he had imagined. He decides to talk to Manny and Tiago, asking them to assign security at the hospital to protect his sister. The next day, John returns to the place where he found his sister. While searching around, he is shocked to find that a young man from the area is wearing his sister's necklace. John goes after the young man and asks him about the chain he has, trying to figure out where he got it from. However, the young man doesn't understand what John is saying because he doesn't speak English. John gets frustrated with him and starts hitting him and all his friends until Raina shows up and separates them. Raina tries to solve the issue, acting as the translator between John and the young man. At that moment, the young man says that it was Nissan who gave him the chain personally because she's a friend of his sister. He mentions that Sandy had been helping them with everything she could, and there's no way she would hurt them. The young man also offers to help John and tells him he found Sandy's notebook near the scene of the incident, so he took it and hid it. The young man goes to get the notebook and hands it to John, also offering to give him the chain. But John tells him to keep the chain and thanks him for his help, then walks away. John sits in the park for a while, trying to find something useful in his sister's notebook, but he finds a lot of torn papers. There's one blank sheet with nothing written on it. John gets suspicious and starts scratching the paper, and soon a phone number appears. He immediately calls the number and discovers that it's the photographer's number, the one who worked with Sandy. John introduces himself and says he's Sandy's brother, asking to meet him. The photographer agrees, and John goes to meet him. He asks if the photographer knows anything about the incident that happened to his sister. The photographer starts explaining everything, saying that many children are kidnapped from poor areas, and once they're taken, they completely disappear, so everyone thinks they've died. But Sandy was the only one who knew this was something bigger, and that there were huge corruption operations happening in the country. Sandy had been investigating this on her own until one day she called the photographer and asked him to come take pictures of an interview she was having with some drug dealers. Through this interview, she found out a lot of things she shouldn't have known, and because of that, she was targeted for an assassination attempt. John asks about the things his sister found out, but the photographer refuses to say more, stating he was just there to take pictures and nothing more. He has a flash drive with a copy of the pictures, but he refuses to give it to John, clearly scared of something and wanting to leave. John doesn't press him any further and lets him go, but before the photographer leaves, John sneaks up on him and steals the flash drive without him noticing. Once the photographer gets into his car and starts to drive away, the car explodes, killing the photographer instantly. John is shocked and begins to recall his memories of wars and battles, and he's on the verge of breaking down. But at that moment, he spots the Asian girl who had tried to kill his sister. He runs after her and tries to catch her, but she gets into her car and escapes quickly. John then meets with Manny, explains what happened, and shows him the pictures from the flash drive. They find out that the photos show Sandy interacting with drug dealers, and they discover that the pictures were taken near a well-known person, Malha Lily. John decides to go there to continue the investigation. When he arrives, he spots the drug dealer that his sister had been in contact with, named Lama. John keeps watching him until he sees him go into a bathroom. John follows him, enters after him, and starts hitting him to get information about what happened. Lama then explains everything, revealing that he works as a smuggler for a famous Japanese gang called the Yakuza. This gang is behind all the shady activities in the country, whether it's theft, drug trafficking, arms dealing, or prostitution. They are also the ones who kidnap young children to force them into prostitution, and they practically own everything in the city. He also reveals that the head of this gang ordered Sandy's death because she was investigating them and had uncovered a lot about their operations. In the end, Lama tells him about the place where the gang conducts all its activities. John decides to go to this place and seek revenge for his sister, but before he leaves, he notices that Lama has a bag containing documents related to many shady operations. John takes the bag and heads to the location Lama mentioned. He enters the place pretending to be a regular customer. To his surprise, the place is filled with every illegal thing he could imagine, and he even finds a group of new kids, clearly kidnapped. John watches the situation from a distance until the guards notice him and start to suspect him. They call the Asian girl, who turns out to be the gang leader's assistant. She is alerted to his presence at the place and decides to use the situation to her advantage. She orders the guards to kill John and heads to the hospital to finish off his sister. At the same time, John goes to the leader of the gang, whose name is Hermote, and explains everything that happened, how he took the briefcase from him, which contains important documents related to many people. The gang leader gets angry, pulls out a sword, and kills John immediately. From this, we understand that Hermote is responsible for all the criminal operations happening in the country, and he manages everything from his seat without direct involvement, and almost no one knows his true identity. When Hermote finds out about John's problem, he decides to take action and calls one of his men, ordering him to kill John and take the briefcase from him right away. The surprise is that the person he contacts is Officer Tiago, and here we learn that Tiago and his partner are working for the gang and helping them with all the shady operations they are carrying out. Tiago decides to take Carol and go to kill John as Hermote instructed. At the same time, all the guards in the place confront John and try to kill him, but he manages to fight them off and kills them all. After a while, Tiago and Carol arrive at the place to kill John, but at the last moment, Officer Rena arrives after hearing gunfire reports about the location. Of course, Tiago can't do anything in front of Rena, so he asks John to hand over the briefcase he took from Lena, as it is a very important piece of evidence in the case. Since John trusts her, he easily hands over the briefcase and goes with her. Later, John thinks about Tiago's words and notices that Tiago mentioned Lima's name without him saying anything. John realizes that Tiago and Carol are working with the gang and decides to follow them. Before leaving, he asks Rena to go to the hospital immediately because his sister is in danger. At the same time, the Asian girl arrives at the hospital to kill Sandy, but at the last moment, Lena arrives and shoots the girl, killing her, and giving Sandy a second chance at life. Meanwhile, they go to the old warehouse with the briefcase, which contains a large number of gang members, and they are also using many children in the warehouse. The surprise is that John is hiding in the car's trunk, belonging to Tiago, and watches the situation from a distance. He notices that the gang members are preparing the children and planning to smuggle them in ships to Japan to work in shady operations there. John calls Manny and tells him everything, saying he will bring force to the location immediately, but he warns him not to talk over the police radio. John decides not to wait for the police and enters to confront the gang alone and save the children. The number of gang members is huge, and even Hermot, the gang leader, is there. Still, John doesn't care and enters the place, engaging them with courage. A fierce battle ensues between them, and John keeps taking them down one by one with great skill until he kills all the gang members, leaving only Hermot, Tiago, and Carol. The problem, however, is that his ammunition has run out, and he has no choice but to fight them with his bare hands. He engages them in hand-to-hand combat, showcasing his expertise in martial arts. In the end, John manages to defeat the three of them without using any weapons. Tiago is on the verge of dying, but before he dies, he decides to do something right. He takes out a safe key and gives it to John, telling him that the safe contains the names of all the people who are helping the gang with their shady operations. He asks John to give the safe key to Rena, as she will handle it. In the end, Tiago asks John to give him a gun so he can commit suicide and end his suffering. John agrees, gives him the gun, and leaves. After a few moments, John hears a gunshot and realizes that Tiago killed himself. Later, John goes to rescue the children in the warehouse. The police arrive and arrest the remaining members of the gang. A few days later, Sandy wakes up from the coma and starts regaining her consciousness, and John is there by her side. It's clear how happy he is. Later, Manny goes to talk to John and tells him that he is a very special person who managed to do what the police hadn't been able to do for years. Because of this, Manny offers him a job at the Foreign Ministry, as they need someone with his skills, and he will have an important role. John agrees to the job and takes on his first official mission, beginning his journey of facing corruption and crime, and the movie ends. If you enjoyed the movie, give us a like and leave your opinion in the comments.